I've been putting off night shift horror stories because honestly, they terrify me more than any other type. There is something about being alone in familiar places during the hours when the world sleeps that amplifies every fear. But these 3 submissions were too disturbing to ignore. Night shift workers exist in a different reality than the rest of us. They know the sounds an empty building makes at 3 am. They understand how shadows move differently when artificial light is the only thing holding back complete darkness. They've learned to distinguish between the settling of old pipes and ... something else. Tonight's 3 stories come from people who thought they knew their workplaces. People who believed they understood every corner, every sound, every normal occurrence that happens when the sun goes down. They were wrong. This story comes from Brandon, a 29-year-old security guard who worked the night shift at a large office complex in downtown Atlanta. He thought he'd seen everything a security job could offer until his encounter with the building's most persistent after-hours visitor. I'd been working security at the Pinnacle Business Center for almost 18 months when this happened. 32-story building, mostly accounting firms and tech startups. The kind of place that's completely dead after 8 p.m., except for the occasional entrepreneur burning the midnight oil. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the routine was straightforward. Monitor the security cameras, do walking rounds every 2 hours, make sure all the access points stayed secure. Good money for someone who didn't mind solitude and had no problem staying awake all night. The building had its quirks. Old AV system that made weird noises, elevators that sometimes moved on their own when the building settled, fluorescent lights that flickered in the basement levels. After 18 months, I knew every normal sound, every expected movement pattern. That's why I immediately noticed when something changed. It started on a Tuesday night in October. Around 2:30 a.m. I was doing my regular camera sweep when I caught movement on the lobby monitor. Someone was standing outside the main entrance, just standing there. Not moving, not trying to get in, just standing perfectly still under the streetlight. I switched to the exterior camera for a better view. It was a woman, maybe in her 30s, wearing a dark coat. She was facing the building, but from the angle, I couldn't see her face clearly. What I could see was that she'd been standing in the exact same position for at least 10 minutes. I figured she was waiting for someone, maybe a rideshare pickup that was running late. But after 20 minutes, she was still there. Same position, hadn't moved an inch. I called down to the desk phone to see if anyone had been trying to contact the building, but there were no missed calls. When I looked back at the monitor, she was gone. The next night, same time, she was back. 2:30 a.m. exactly, same spot under the streetlight. This time I watched her for 35 minutes before she simply walked away, disappearing around the corner like she'd never been there. By the 4th night, I was getting concerned. This woman was establishing a pattern, and in security work, unexplained patterns usually mean trouble. I decided to go down and talk to her. I took the elevator to the lobby and walked to the main entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see her clearly for the first time. She was younger than I'd thought, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair. Her coat looked expensive, well-tailored. But her face was completely blank. Not sad, not angry, not waiting for anything. Just ... empty. Like she was looking at the building, but not really seeing it. I tapped on the glass door to get her attention. She didn't react. I tapped harder, and this time she turned toward me. The moment our eyes met, I felt something I'd never experienced before. A cold that started in my chest and spread outward like ice water in my veins. Her eyes weren't just looking at me. They were looking through me like I was made of glass. She raised her hand and pressed it against the door where my hand was on the other side. The glass between our palms felt like it was getting colder by the second. Then she spoke, and even through the thick glass, I could hear her perfectly. "I need to get to the 27th floor." "I'm sorry," I said, "but the building is closed. Business hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. She didn't seem to hear me. She just repeated, "I need to get to the 27th floor." "What's on the 27th floor?" I asked. For the first time, her expression changed. A smile spread across her face, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile you see in old photographs, forced and unnatural. "My office," she said. "I work late. But here's the thing. I knew every company in that building, every employee who had after-hours access. The 27th floor housed Blackstone Financial, and they'd moved out 6 months ago. The entire floor had been empty since then. There's nobody working on the 27th floor," I told her. "That space is vacant." The smile disappeared from her face instantly. She pressed both hands against the glass now, and I could see her breath fogging up her side of the door, even though it was a warm night. "That's not possible," she said, and her voice had changed. It was higher now, more desperate. "I have a presentation tomorrow. Mr. Hartwell is expecting the quarterly reports." Mr. Hartwell. I knew that name from the building directory. Robert Hartwell had been the CEO of Blackstone Financial. But according to the management company, Blackstone had relocated their entire operation to Dallas after Hartwell died in a car accident. "Ma'am," I said gently, "Mr. Hartwell isn't here anymore. Blackstone Financial moved out months ago." She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, then denial, then something that looked like panic. "But I have to finish the reports," she whispered. "He's counting on me. Everyone's counting on me." That's when I made the connection. I'd heard this story from the day shift supervisor when I first started working here. There had been an incident 6 months ago, right around the time Blackstone moved out. An employee had been working late, trying to finish a crucial presentation for the next morning. She'd been found at her desk the next day by the cleaning crew, apparently having suffered a massive heart attack from stress and overwork. Her name was Linda Chun, and she'd been 26 years old. "Linda?" I said softly. The woman's eyes widened, and she stepped back from the door like I'd slapped her. "How do you know my name?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer that question. How do you tell someone they're dead? How do you explain that they've been standing outside their former workplace every night for 6 months, trying to finish work that no longer matters? "Linda," I said, "you don't have to work late anymore. The presentation is done. Mr. Hartwell, Mr. Hartwell knows you did your best." She looked at me with such relief that it broke my heart. "He knows? He knows. You can rest now." She nodded slowly, and I watched as her entire posture relaxed for the first time since I'd been observing her. "I've been so tired," she said. "I've been trying to finish for so long." "It's finished now," I assured her. She smiled again, but this time it was genuine, peaceful. "Thank you for telling me." I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember if I'd finished or not. She turned and started walking away, but after a few steps, she looked back. "Will you tell them I tried my best?" she asked. "They already know," I said. She waved goodbye and disappeared around the corner. I never saw her again. But here's the part that still gives me chills. The next morning, I mentioned the encounter to the building manager. He looked surprised and told me he'd been getting reports from the night cleaning crew about computers turning on by themselves on the 27th floor, always around 2:30 a.m. Documents would be found open on the screens, quarterly reports and presentation files. After that night, the computers stayed off. The 27th floor remained quiet. 6 months later, they finally leased the space to a new company. On their first day, they found a manila folder in one of the desk drawers that the previous cleaning crew had missed. Inside were completed quarterly reports, perfectly organized and ready for presentation. At the top of the first page, in neat handwriting, was a note for Mr. Hartwell, L. Chun. I kept working at that building for another year, but I never forgot Linda. She taught me that sometimes the most frightening thing about the night shift isn't what might be lurking in the darkness. Sometimes it's the realization that dedication and responsibility can bind us to our duties even beyond death. And sometimes, all someone needs is permission to finally rest. This story comes from Vanessa, a 31-year-old registered nurse who worked the night shift at a psychiatric hospital in rural Oregon. She learned that some patients never really leave, even after their time at the facility has officially ended. I'd been working night shifts at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital for about 3 years when this happened. Millbrook was one of those old state institutions, built in the 1940s, with long corridors and high ceilings that seemed to swallow sound during the day and amplify it at night. Night shift in a psychiatric facility is different from regular hospital work. The patients are usually sleeping, medicated, or quietly dealing with their thoughts. My job was to do hourly wellness checks, distribute medications when needed, and document any incidents. Most nights were routine. The night shift team was small, just me, another nurse named Patricia, and a security guard named Floyd. We covered 3 wings of the building, about 60 patients total. Patricia and I split the wings between us, and Floyd roamed the common areas. Wing C was my assignment that month, and it housed our long-term patients, people who'd been with us for years, some who probably would never leave. I knew all their routines, their sleep patterns, their particular needs. Room 314 was supposed to be empty. The patient who'd occupied room 314, a woman named Dorothy Vance, had passed away 2 weeks earlier. Natural causes in her sleep. She'd been at Millbrook for 12 years, suffering from severe dissociative disorder and recurring episodes of psychosis. But in her lucid moments, she was one of the sweetest people I'd ever cared for. Dorothy had a routine that never varied. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., she would get up and stand by her window, looking out at the courtyard. She never spoke during these episodes, just stood there for exactly 7 minutes, then returned to bed. We'd learned not to disturb her during these moments, unless absolutely necessary. 3 nights after Dorothy's funeral, I was doing my 3 a.m. rounds when I saw light coming from under the door of room 314. This was impossible. The room was empty, had been thoroughly cleaned, and all the electrical fixtures had been checked before it was sealed for renovation. I used my master key and opened the door. The room was empty, but the overhead light was on. I flipped the switch off and made a note to report the electrical issue in the morning. Probably just faulty wiring in an old building. The next night, same thing. Light under the door at 3 a.m. This time, I didn't just turn off the light. I unscrewed the bulb completely and took it with me. Room 314 would stay dark whether the switch was working or not. Night 3, I approached room 314 at 2:45 a.m., determined to solve this mystery. The hallway was dark, all the other rooms quiet. I positioned myself where I could see the door clearly and waited. At exactly 3:17 a.m., light began seeping under the door of room 314. I opened the door immediately, and what I saw made my blood freeze. The overhead light was on. Impossible, since I'd removed the bulb. But more than that, there was a figure standing by the window. A translucent, shimmering figure that I recognized immediately. Dorothy was standing in her usual spot, looking out at the courtyard, just like she had every night for 12 years. I should have been terrified. I should have run. But instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. Dorothy looked so peaceful, so content to be back in her familiar routine. "Dorothy?" I whispered. She didn't turn around, but she spoke in that soft, childlike voice I remembered so well. "The birds aren't singing tonight, Vanessa. Why aren't the birds singing?" During her life, Dorothy had often talked about birds that only she could see and hear. In her lucid moments, she'd explained that the birds told her when she was safe, when the bad thoughts couldn't reach her. When she couldn't hear the birds, that's when we knew she was having an episode. Maybe they're sleeping, Dorothy. It's nighttime. She nodded, still facing the window. I can't sleep when they're not singing. I've been trying to sleep for such a long time. How long have you been trying to sleep? Since the White Room. Since they put me in the White Room with no windows. The White Room. That's what Dorothy had called the morgue when we tried to explain where her body would go after she passed. The concept had terrified her so much that we had to sedate her. You don't have to stay in the White Room anymore, Dorothy. You can go wherever you want now. She turned toward me then, and I could see through her to the window behind. But her face was clearer than the rest of her, and she was smiling. I want to stay here. This is my room. These are my birds, even when they don't sing. But Dorothy, your body, you're not alive anymore. She tilted her head, considering this. My body was tired, but I'm not tired anymore. I just want to listen for the birds. I stood there for a moment, watching this woman who'd spent 12 years of her life in this room, who'd found some measure of peace in this small space with its view of the courtyard. Who was I to tell her she couldn't stay? How about this, I said. You can stay and listen for your birds, but you have to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't turn the lights on anymore. The other nurses might get scared, and scared nurses make mistakes. You don't want anyone to make mistakes, do you? Dorothy considered this seriously. No, I don't want anyone to make mistakes. Mistakes make the bad thoughts come back. Exactly. So no more lights, okay? You can stand by your window, but you have to do it in the dark. Okay, Vanessa? I promise. I watched as she turned back to the window. As she did, the overhead light gradually dimmed until the room was dark again. Can you hear them now? I asked. The birds? She was quiet for a long moment, listening. Then, very softly, yes, they're singing now. Very quietly, but they're singing. I left her there and continued my rounds. When I came back an hour later, the room was empty and dark. For the next 2 weeks, I checked room 314 every night during my 3:17 a.m. rounds. Sometimes I would see a faint shimmer by the window, but the lights never came on again. Dorothy was keeping her promise. Then one night, Patricia mentioned something that made my heart skip. You know that empty room in Wing C? 314? I keep hearing the weirdest thing when I walk past it. What kind of thing? Bird songs? Soft bird songs, like there's a radio playing classical music with birds chirping. But when I stop to listen closely, it goes quiet. I smiled. Dorothy had found her birds again. A month later, room 314 was renovated and assigned to a new patient. But on that patient's first night, she came to the nurse's station with a strange request. The lady in my room, she said. She asked me to tell you that the birds are singing beautiful songs now, and she's ready to sleep. We never assigned another patient to room 314 after that. Officially, it's used for storage now. But sometimes when I pass by during my rounds, I hear the faint sound of birds singing softly in the darkness. Dorothy found her peace, not by leaving, but by staying in the place where she'd learned to listen for the songs that told her everything would be okay. And you know what? Everything was okay. The birds were singing, Dorothy was sleeping, and sometimes the most healing thing you can do for someone is simply let them stay where they feel safe, even if that somewhere happens to be on the other side of life. Our final story comes from Curtis, a 42-year-old overnight janitor who worked at a prestigious law firm in downtown Chicago. He discovered that some cases never truly close, and some clients never stop waiting for justice. I'd been cleaning office buildings for nearly 15 years when I got the contract for Hartman, Becker, and Associates. High-end law firm, 52nd floor of the Millennium Tower, the kind of place where lawyers bill more per hour than I made in a month. The work was straightforward: vacuum, dust, empty trash, clean bathrooms, sanitized conference rooms. The overnight shift suited me fine. I could work at my own pace, listen to music, and never had to deal with the stress and attitude that comes with high-powered lawyers. The office had a specific layout: reception area, 20 individual offices, 3 conference rooms, and a record storage room that took up about a quarter of the floor. Most of my time was spent in the main areas, but once a week I had to clean the storage room too. That storage room gave me the creeps from day one. It was windowless, filled floor to ceiling with filing cabinets and document boxes. The air always felt stale, like it hadn't circulated properly in years. But it was the silence that bothered me most. The room seemed to absorb sound, making even my footsteps muffled and distant. I'd been working there about 6 months when I started noticing things that didn't add up. It began with the filing cabinets. I'd clean the storage room on Friday nights, making sure all the cabinets were properly closed and locked. But when I'd return the following Friday, I'd always find 1 or 2 drawers slightly open, like someone had been looking through files and hadn't quite pushed them shut. I mentioned it to the day shift cleaning supervisor, thinking maybe attorneys were working late and accessing files after I'd cleaned. But she checked with the office manager. Nobody had been in that storage room after hours. In fact, most of the files in there were old cases, some going back decades. The second thing I noticed was paperwork on the floor. Every Friday, I'd find documents scattered around one particular filing cabinet, like someone had been frantically searching through files and dropped papers in their haste. The documents were always from the same case: Martinez versus Industrial Dynamics, 1987. I'd gather up the papers, put them back in the correct folder, and make sure the filing cabinet was secure. But next Friday, same thing. Papers from the Martinez case scattered on the floor. Filing cabinet drawer slightly open. After this happened 4 weeks in a row, I decided to read some of the documents to understand what was so important about this case. Rosa Martinez had been a factory worker who'd been exposed to toxic chemicals at Industrial Dynamics, a manufacturing company. She'd developed a rare form of cancer and sued the company for damages. The case had gone on for 3 years, with Industrial Dynamics fighting every claim and dragging out the litigation as long as possible. According to the documents, Rosa had died in 1989, halfway through the legal proceedings. The case had been continued by her family, but Industrial Dynamics had eventually won on a technicality. The Martinez family received nothing. What bothered me was the tone of the later documents. There were memos between the lawyers discussing strategy, and it was clear they'd known about internal company documents that proved Industrial Dynamics had known about the chemical dangers for years. But somehow, those documents had never made it to court. The more I read, the more angry I became. This woman had died because of corporate negligence, and her family had been denied justice because of legal maneuvering and missing evidence. That's when I realized I might not be alone in my anger. It was a Friday night in February, around 2 a.m., and I was cleaning the storage room. As usual, I found papers from the Martinez case scattered on the floor. But this time, as I was picking them up, I heard something that made me freeze. Someone was crying. It was soft, muffled sobbing, coming from somewhere deeper in the storage room. I followed the sound to the back corner, where the oldest files were stored. The crying seemed to be coming from behind one of the filing cabinets. "Hello?" I called out softly. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped immediately. But then I heard a voice, a woman's voice, speaking in accented English. Please help me find them." "Find what?" I asked. The papers that show they knew. They knew the chemicals were poison, but they hid the papers. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Ma'am, who are you?" "Rosa Martinez. I worked at the factory. I got sick because they lied. Rosa Martinez, the woman from the case files. The woman who died in 1989. Rosa, I said gently, it's 2023. Your case was decided a long time ago. No. The voice became more urgent. The papers are here. I know they're here. The lawyer said they'd find them, but then he stopped looking. He stopped fighting for me. That's when I understood. Rosa had been searching through these files for over 30 years, looking for the evidence that could have saved her case, could have given her family the justice they deserved. Rosa, what do these papers look like? What am I looking for? Internal memos, safety reports, documents that show Industrial Dynamics knew about the chemicals in 1985, 2 years before I got sick. My lawyer said if we could find those documents, we could prove they covered up the danger. I spent the next hour going through every file in that storage room, looking for anything related to Industrial Dynamics. Finally, in a misfiled folder labeled Miscellaneous 1988, I found them. Dozens of internal company memos, safety reports, and chemical analysis documents, all dated between 1983 and 1986, all proving that Industrial Dynamics had known about the toxic chemical exposure and had chosen to hide the information rather than protect their workers. These documents should have been part of the Martinez case file. Instead, they'd been buried in an unrelated folder, effectively hidden from Rosa's legal team. Rosa, I called out into the storage room. I found them. I found the papers you were looking for. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, and I could see my breath as I spoke. But Rosa's voice, when it came, was filled with relief. You found them? You really found them? I found them. All the evidence you needed. Industrial Dynamics knew about the chemical dangers years before you got sick. There was a long pause. Then, what happens now? My case is over. I'm dead. My family. They gave up fighting long ago. I thought about that. What could happen now? The case was closed. The statute of limitations had long since passed, and Rosa's family had probably moved on with their lives decades ago. But then I had an idea. Rosa, what if there were other workers? Other people who got sick from the same chemicals, but never knew Industrial Dynamics had hidden the evidence? There were others, she said immediately. At least a dozen workers in my section got sick. Some died. Some are probably still alive, but sick. What if I could get these documents to someone who could use them? Not for your case, but for other workers who might still be able to fight. The silence stretched so long I thought Rosa had left. Then, very quietly, would you do that? Would you help the others? I'll do everything I can. Over the next few weeks, I researched environmental lawyers who specialized in corporate cover-ups. I found a firm that agreed to review the documents, and they were shocked by what I discovered. Those memos and safety reports became the foundation for a class action lawsuit that eventually helped dozens of former Industrial Dynamics workers get compensation for their illnesses. The night after I'd handed over the documents to the lawyers, I was cleaning the storage room as usual. But for the first time in months, I didn't find any scattered papers on the floor. All the filing cabinets were neatly closed and locked. And I heard Rosa's voice one last time, faint but clear. Thank you. Now I can rest. The storage room felt different after that. Warmer, somehow. Less oppressive. The files stayed organized, and I never again heard crying or searching in the dark corners. 6 months later, the law firm received a letter from the family of Rosa Martinez. They'd heard about the class action lawsuit and wanted to thank whoever had found the hidden documents. They finally brought justice to the workers. Industrial Dynamics had poisoned. Rosa's daughter wrote, "My mother always said the truth would come out eventually. She never gave up believing that someone would find the evidence that was hidden from us. Thank you for helping her keep her promise to the other workers." I kept that letter, and sometimes when I'm working late nights in other buildings, I think about Rosa. She spent 30 years searching for justice, not just for herself, but for all the workers who'd been poisoned by corporate greed and legal manipulation. Sometimes the night shift isn't just about cleaning up messes. Sometimes it's about uncovering truths that were never meant to see the light of day. And sometimes the most important work we do is helping someone finish what they started, even if it takes decades to get it right. These 3 stories remind us that the night shift reveals truths that daylight often hides. Whether it's unfinished business, unheard needs, or hidden injustices, the darkness has a way of amplifying what matters most to the human spirit. Brandon learned that sometimes people need permission to rest. Vanessa discovered that healing can happen anywhere, even in the space between life and death. And Curtis found that some fights for justice never end. They just wait for the right person to carry them forward. The next time you see someone heading to work as the sun goes down, remember that they're entering a different world than the one the rest of us inhabit. A world where the impossible becomes possible, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where ordinary people become the bridge between what was and what still needs to be. Thanks for listening, and remember, some work can only be done in the darkness, by people brave enough to face whatever waits for them in the quiet hours of the night.